Rikki Ott, Ph.D., is a community activist, a former commercial salmon fisherman, as opposed to fisherman, and has a degree in marine toxicology with a specialty in oil pollution. She experienced firsthand the devastating effects of the Exxon Valdez oil spill and chose to do something about it. She is the author of Sound Truth and Corporate Myths, The Legacy of the Exxon Valdez Oil Spill, and Not One Drop, Promises, Betrayal, and Courage in the Wake of the Exxon Valdez Oil Spill. She is also the founder of 3 nonprofit organizations that deal with lingering harm from man-made environmental disasters. Dr. Rikki Ott, welcome to the Global Freedom Report.
Thank you very much.
How were you generally treated, I'm just curious, as a fisherman in a group of what are ordinarily fishermen?
Well, it turns out in Cordova, Alaska, it doesn't matter man, woman, old, young. What matters is how many fish you can catch and how many stories you generate in the process of catching those fish. And since I had never been on a fishing boat in my life, and since my partner had never been on a motorized boat in his life, we generated a lot of stories, and eventually we started catching a lot of fish. So it went okay, and I still remember the day I went into the Cordova District Fishermen's Union for a board meeting to see how could I pay back what I was getting from the sea, how could I contribute, what could I volunteer. And I hadn't told anybody about my education because it didn't really matter. What mattered was how many fish were caught. So when the guys all started talking about the different issues, eventually they came around to Alyeska, the consortium of companies that own and operate the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. I said, oh, maybe I can help there. And they all shot me this really disgusted look. And I thought it was because I was a woman. But it turns out I didn't really know my history. I didn't know that this was the same bunch of men that had fought the terminus from being situated in Port Valdez, had taken it all the way to the Supreme Court, had won only to have an act of Congress overturn, the lawsuit. So that's when I said, well, I do have a master's and a doctorate in oil pollution, and then their faces all changed again. And in an instant, I was on the board, and that kind of launched. That was all before the oil spill, the Exxon Valdez.
Oh, that is interesting, and I'll tell you, it's also gratifying to know that a woman who walks in who's qualified to do something doesn't get rebuffed simply because she's a woman.
No, I got voted on the board instantly, and the person who had been handling the oil issues passed this whole pile of papers to me and said, here you are. There's a federal hearing in a week. I'm going moose hunting. And
oh, finally, someone who can take all this off my show. Excellent. Now, the reason I brought you on is because I want to talk about the Gulf oil disaster, but we're going to do that after the break. And in the short time we have here, I'm curious if you could share with us any of your firsthand experiences. What was so firsthand? Were you on the Exxon Valdez when the incident happened?
No, I was commercial fishing. I was at my home, and I was the first fisherman to fly, actually the second plane out to fly to oversee it. And when I flew over the wreck of the Exxon Valdez, I just remember being totally shocked and traumatized and thinking, how can one person make a difference? What can one person do? And then I realized, I thought, I know enough to make a difference. Do I care enough? And that sort of set me into a tailspin. And when I came out of that and realized, yes, I care. I care about the community. I care about the sound. I'm going to make a stand, and I'm going to make it here. Everything shifted. And that's really been directing my life, that one split-second decision back on March 24th, 1989. It's all about how do we get off oil. And I thought the Gulf was going to be sort of the trigger point. And it hasn't reached its promise yet, but I think there's still time.
Well, now, I want to go back to the Valdez for a second, because everybody knows the Valdez oil spill, Exxon Valdez. That's like, Pledge of Allegiance or American flag. People know the phrase. They don't necessarily yet have Deepwater Horizon entrenched, but they do Valdez. When you saw this, how bad was it? I'm talking about the Valdez. How bad was it?
Okay, well, let's not remove the word Exxon from the Exxon Valdez, because there is a town of Valdez, and the town did not have an oil spill.
No problem.
So the tanker Exxon Valdez, there's two reasons not to erase that word. This is all holding corporations accountable for the messes that they make. I mean, we believe as a people that there's a pact. You follow the laws, we don't get hurt. If you mess up, then the laws will hold you accountable. And that, it turns out, is not what happens at all, not even close. So here I mean, it was like this totally surreal moment where it came around the corner in the plane, around Knowles Head, and there is this, tanker on flat, calm ocean. And there was this inky blue stain surrounding this bright red tanker deck, and there was a big cloud, a big purple, bluish whitish cloud in the air, and that was the hydrocarbons just boiling off the oil surface. And I just knew that, one good storm, this whole thing was going to be a nightmare. It was 10 hours after the grounding. The contingency plan, the infamous contingency plan, the one that had, walruses in the Gulf, that one. But in Alaska, there really are walruses. But anyway, the contingency plan said, hey, within 6 hours, there'd be people there responding to control and contain the oil spill, and there was nothing. There was not even a handkerchief in the water. So,
okay, now,
kind of all smoke and mirrors.
Now, let me ask this: there. Did you have any occasion at any point, with respect to the Gulf of Mexico, the explosion at Deep Horizon? BP Deep Horizon, just so that we can not forget that either. Did you have occasion to travel down to the Gulf Coast? Have you seen the condition of the Gulf Coast at any time since April with your own eyes?
Oh, that's so funny. I thought this whole interview was going to be about that because I was actually on national tour when I saw the newspaper with the wreck of the blowout, and I just went, nope. Can't go there again. I'm not going there again. Too much emotional trauma, too much soul trauma. I hid from the media for a full week. And then I started realizing really how much we as a community had learned and how maybe we could prevent some of the mistakes that we made in Alaska from happening in the Gulf. And I went, you know what? All those poor people, they're going to suffer and fall for the same mistakes. So before I changed my mind or lost my nerve, I actually just put my visa down and got a one-way ticket. And I've been in the Gulf for 5 months. And I'm going back in January through April because of what happened in August.
Now, hang on.
Okay.
Hang on for the August story, because I have a reason I asked it this way. I want you to tell me the comparison. Whatever it is you've seen in the Gulf, you saw what you saw with the Exxon Valdez. How do you compare the two?
Well, unfortunately, BP used Exxon's songbook. I mean, to the note. I stood in a high school gym, just like I did in Alaska, down in Orange Beach, Alabama, when the BP representative, community liaison said, "We will make you whole. BP will pay all legitimate claims." Exxon used the word reasonable. I mean, I got goosebumps because that is exactly what Exxon said in Alaska. And I shot over to the microphone, grabbed it, turned around to face these 1,500 people and said, I am an Exxon Valdez oil spill survivor. We were dumb enough to believe Exxon when Exxon said those exact same words. Let me share with you how that worked for us. And basically, our ecosystem collapsed. We still are not fishing herring from something that happened 21 years ago. The herring just never recovered from their collapse when the young of the year from 89 just simply never showed up as adults in 1993. And I mean, the economy, the ecosystem has still not fully recovered because when you take out a basic sort of chink in the whole mortar of the ecosystem, like herring are a basic forage fish in the whole entire ecosystem. You take out herring, you just kind of unravel the whole ecosystem. So, I mean, obviously, there's still economic effects. If the herring fisheries are closed. So, and then we got, totally lost in court. We got paid 10 cents on the dollar 20 years too late. So some of my personal friends were going bankrupt. They held on for 20 years, hoping they would get compensation to pay for long-term harm. And then the punitive damage award was just shot down, and they went bankrupt 21 years after the fact. So I told people, okay, plan A can be you believe BP comes through and pays. Lovely story, lovely make-believe. But what if BP doesn't? What's going to be your plan B? Because we waited 4 years in Alaska, and we didn't have a plan B. And so that's what I've spent 5 months doing. I've been networking back and forth. I had rented a car. I had a long-term lease. I just drove back and forth from Louisiana to Florida, giving community forums and helping communities organize, then helping the communities link with one another across the Gulf, and empowering people to believe that they could step up and defend their own backyard instead of waiting for BP and the federal government, and instead of believing what the federal government was telling them. And I tell you, this is the Deep South. This is not just like the South, right? This is Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, very challenged, kind of captured minds, colonized mindset, very polite. And here I come in the middle of this. And finally, people were getting sick. I mean, oh my gosh, it wasn't just workers like with Exxon Valdez, because Exxon Valdez, the beaches were all mostly very remote, 30,000 people top in the Gulf of Alaska that got physically impacted by the Exxon Valdez. But in the Gulf of Mexico, we're talking 4 to 5, probably million, if not more, people living right on the ocean, the coast. And when the oil rolled ashore, in the air, in the sea mist, in the rain, dissolved in the water where you couldn't see it. I mean, forget the tar balls that you could see. There were all these other phases of oil coming ashore. People got sick. And they said, what's happening to us? Because the government is saying there's no problem with the air quality. There's no problem with the water quality. Why does the air smell like my child's crayons melting in the sun? Why is my throat closing down, my eyes? Why do I have this headache? What's going on? I said, well, do you believe the federal government? Well, how can this be? And so people finally realized, can we do our own air and water quality samples? And it was like, absolutely. And so myself and others who had academic training trained people, the bucket brigade people. There was a number of organizations that were capable of finding the chemists, finding the environmental labs, putting out protocol, helping people understand how they could just go out and test the rain, test the water in their swimming pools, test the air quality. And people did that. And then they realized, oh, my God, it's like nothing what? Like the federal government. I mean, we're finding dangerous levels of oil and toxic dispersants in our swimming pools, in our backyard, for God's sake.
And yes, I want to get to some of the meat of that, not so much how the people themselves are standing up and doing what they're doing, but the results that are coming from this kind of testing. Since you saw the Exxon Valdez shortly after it spilled, and since you have been down to the Gulf of Mexico, visually, how do the two compare, or do they? In other words, you saw this big, ugly cloud of whatever in the Valdez. Do you see anything comparable around Deep Horizon at this point?